Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Monday Show via the Everything Is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, and he is Aaron Stokes, and we're here to talk about Newcastle's 4-0 win over Leicester City on Saturday. A great performance, a great result for the Magpies. Just how much was it that Newcastle were brilliant and Leicester were very, very poor? And more importantly, can Newcastle United build on this? Here's hoping they can. As usual, this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. And United's defensive display on Saturday was not too dissimilar to the protection offered by NordVPN, near enough unbeatable, as is a special offer we have for our listeners and viewers, 4 extra months on a 2-year plan. The sign-up link is in the podcast description. Protect yourself and help support the podcast as well. Let's get on with the show. Aaron, you well?
Very well. And I'm going to steal a phrase that you've uttered many times on this podcast over the years. How refreshing is it to be sat here on a Monday? You don't have to ask me how my weekend was with Newcastle United ruining it. Everything is fine in the world again.
Yes, certainly. So it is lovely to be doing a show on the back of not just the win, but a fantastic performance. And just to really emphasize how happy everybody is, we're 10 minutes late because you got stopped there in the office before you're about to come in by one of the bosses who wanted to talk all about Newcastle United on Saturday.
Yep, and it was a very positive conversation rather than us talking about whether
Didn't
pressure's
happen
on Eddie
last
Howe.
weekend, did it?
Didn't
Or the
happen
week
last
before
weekend.
that.
Or hardly ever in the last 11 games, hasn't it? So yes, as we say, fantastic to be sat here on a Monday again and looking forward to reviewing a good win.
Yes, and I'm sure everyone watching and everyone listening is just as happy as we are with Newcastle's results and with the performance, just as happy as Eddie Howe is and all the players as well. Aaron, there was plenty to talk about, not least the 4 goals Newcastle United scored. They could have had a few more as well, and plenty of performances, as well as looking at the bigger picture, because that is really key when it comes to what happened on Saturday. But just briefly, sum up what you saw on Saturday.
Well, one, I'll just start by saying this Leicester City team is probably one of the worst we will see at St James's Park, not just this season.
I'm going to stop you there because you've stolen something I have prepared later in the show.
Okay, you dive into that.
I was going to say Newcastle were very good, but I did have a text from you on Saturday evening which said, and ladies and gentlemen, I quote, because I think this is quite a big claim, Leicester City may be the worst team to come to St James's Park ever.
Yeah, maybe I was a little bit over the top there, but let's be completely honest. Leicester were absolutely dismal, and I'll be honest, I was intrigued by the appointment of Ruud van Nistelrooy. I thought it's a bold move, but he has a certain style of play. He likes going at teams, attacking. Maybe he can get them out of trouble. Judging on what I saw Saturday, I think they are destined for the championship. So Leicester were very, very poor. Let's not make any bones about that. Let's not get too carried away. But teams have been at St James's Park this season and been very poor. Admittedly not that poor, but they have been poor, and Newcastle have struggled to pick them off. And even at half-time, when Newcastle were 1-0 up, they were dominating possession, chances created. Leicester were really, really struggling to get hold of the game. I was still sort of sat there thinking, you just don't know what Newcastle's going to come out second half. And thankfully, something that we haven't seen from this Newcastle side in recent times, they've kicked on, put their foot down, they haven't let up, and they've made that domination pay with goals.
Yeah, I was a little bit scared at half time because Newcastle had chances in the first half to go in to the interval, maybe 3 goals up, and they'd not taken their chances. And we'd seen that play out against West Ham, against Everton, Brighton, Brentford, where they'd been brilliant in the first half. And had they gone in to the break 4 or 5 up, you wouldn't have turned your nose up at it. And I did sit there on Saturday during that 15 minutes thinking, are we going to see a repeat of that? Because Leicester traditionally this season been very good in the second half, and Newcastle United have not. The message at half time was to go out and get a second goal as early as possible. And I think maybe Eddie Howe and the players maybe had that in the back of the mind as well. There's been too many games this season where our performance in the second 45 has dropped. And I think going out, and they didn't have to go and score 2 or 3 more goals, as long as they'd just gone out and got that second goal and won and played well as they did in the second half, that would have been enough to boost the confidence and maybe be the turning point for the season. I think the way they performed in the second half, it could be massive for the rest of the campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I said on the pod on Saturday night, and it was that when I was sat there at half time, I was thinking to myself, if Newcastle did do what they've done in recent weeks and come out in the second half and struggle and potentially throw the game away, the meltdown would have been even bigger than it would have been if they'd just lost fair and square to Leicester, as we were talking about pre-game. So look, thankfully they got the job done. They killed that game off early in the second half. Some really good play. They didn't let up. They could have had 4 or 5 or 6. Some really good chances in that second half for a couple of players. Tonali had a good effort. Barnes tested the keeper. Murphy could have had 2 or 3 in the second half. So it's just good to see that Newcastle. We saw it at Brentford last week where they came out and it was night and day from first half to second half. That was the main thing for me, that they just got the job done in a really confident and composed fashion.
But it wasn't all Newcastle United. I mean, for the first 5 minutes or so, Leicester started with real intent, and Newcastle had a bit of work to do at the back, and I felt that was a really important challenge for them. There was one particular cross that Fabian had to get in front of Vardy and clear it into touch. But, the early goal, the first goal, was always going to be key here. And Leicester got it, and goodness knows what the rest of the afternoon would have turned out like. But really important that Newcastle obviously came through that test.
Yeah, the first 5 minutes of the game for me, I was sat there thinking, this isn't looking good. There was 3 or 4 passes inside the first 5 minutes that went astray, and you could just sort of feel a little bit of tension in the air. This, after the fact there'd already been audible groans in the Gallagher because Bruno lost the toss again or got turned round or whatever it was, which has obviously become such a big thing that people have been talking about in recent weeks. But after those first 5 minutes, it was pretty clear that Newcastle were going to be on top. I thought Gordon, he didn't get his goal or his assist on Saturday, but I thought he was really dangerous down the left. Again, just another reminder, play him on that side. Don't keep moving him to the right. Don't keep moving him through the middle. And I know we'll touch on Jacob Murphy undoubtedly later, and I think Murphy scoring 2 and having that type of game Saturday will at least let him keep that position in the team. Gordon will stay out on the left, which is good. And yeah, even though that first half an hour was filled with Newcastle chances, a lot of them from Murphy that they could have scored, I felt that it was very evident pretty soon in the first half that Leicester were really going to struggle to match Newcastle.
Do you think there was anything in the fact that Newcastle United didn't come racing out in the first 5 or 10 minutes? In recent games, we could argue maybe for the majority of this season, we've seen them start quite quickly, especially at home. And then obviously as the game's gone on, then you get the second half and they end up performing not as well. Do you think maybe the fact that they just started a little bit slower, a little bit more controlled rather than 100 miles an hour had something to do with it?
Potentially. I mean, maybe there was a little bit of nerves going around. I mean, we all knew how much pressure was on the team and the manager going into the game, and how much, we've all sat here for the last couple of weeks and said Leicester, Brentford, Ipswich is the key run of games that they need to win. So yeah, maybe there was a little bit of that about it. But like I say, after the first 5 minutes, I felt a lot calmer than I did inside the first 5 minutes, where I was a little bit worried.
But it was a must-win, wasn't it? There's no getting away from
100%.
it. Newcastle had to beat Leicester on Saturday. The players would have been aware of it, as you say. Eddie Howe would have been aware of it. So to handle that responsibility and knowledge of that, it showed really a good test of character of the players.
It did, yeah. And as I say, because it sounds weird because it's Leicester at home, but how many times have we seen this season when Newcastle have really struggled in these fixtures? Games that they should be winning. It sort of feels, as again, I don't want to quote your phrase again, but it does feel refreshing to actually be sat here bigging up this Leicester win. That it's a win that we've seen countless times in previous seasons, and you just take it off the list and move on. Whereas this time felt a bit different because of what had happened at Brighton, because of what happened at West Ham, because of what has happened away at Everton and Fulham. I was confident going into the game because I thought Newcastle should win, but I was nowhere near as confident as I would have been in seasons gone by.
I was a little bit nervous walking down to the stadium, especially as I got closer. I was really fearing what might happen. I was fearful of Jamie Vardy, and they just didn't turn up. No reaction as the goals went in. They were absolutely pitiful, but Newcastle United had to beat what was in front of them, and they did do. I will talk about a few chances that came in the first half. And I mean, Jacob Murphy had 2 before he eventually scored. And it was a wonderful goal, which he scored. Really well worked routine. We'd seen some of that kind of coming because Dan Burn had a chance from a similar routine just a few moments before. Jacob Murphy's reaction, I thought, very, very interesting. He runs over to the corner and he's shouting, "What?" He's clearly frustrated because before he gets that goal, the 2 chances that he did miss, there were audible groans from some sections of the ground. The second chance he had, particularly, he should have put in the back of the net. That reaction from him, what did you make of it?
Well, it's interesting. We were talking about this off air, weren't we? And just for context of obviously we were both at the game in very different situations. I was sort of in the press box, my head's down a lot of the time, trying to keep up with the game. So I was really interested to get your opinion on what the actual sort of crowd reaction was like to Murphy, because I didn't really notice the audible groans. I knew obviously the context, he'd missed 2 chances that he should probably have done better with, but I was a little bit surprised by the celebration. I don't know if you were. I was surprised because 1, Jacob Murphy's not that type of player usually, and 2, maybe was it a combination of those audible groans, the fact that he was just frustrated that he's missed 2? Was it maybe a little bit of the outside noise that's been around his future of late? If that is the case, then I can't wait to see what Sean Longstaff does when he scores his next goal. I can't wait to see what Miggy Almiron does next time he scores his next goal. So yeah, look, maybe he was frustrated at us being frustrated. I don't know. So I was a little bit taken aback by the celebration. Very interesting.
I think he would have been aware of the chat on social media. He's been one of the most heavily criticised players throughout this entirety of the season. I think it's been largely unfair. I think it's right for people to say, he should have scored against Liverpool, he should have scored against Brentford. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But some of the criticism, I think, has been over the top. I still stand by the fact that Newcastle need to go out and get a right winger in January, if not January, then in the summer. As you see him scoring those goals, all that does really is keep him in the side until that new arrival comes, whether that be in the winter or the summer. But yeah, his reaction was quite interesting, simply because I think it kind of echoes what Newcastle United have got to do. It's all good beating Leicester, but you've got to go and beat Brentford, and then you've got to go and beat Ipswich, because if you don't pick up 2 wins out of the next 2, I think it turns out to be a very disappointing week. And the same with Jacob Murphy, cup in his ear, shouting what the Gallagher. I get that, he's frustrated. He probably is frustrated himself because he knows he's missed 4 or 5 chances in the last 2.5 games that he's played. But for him to do that, he's got to go out and do it again when he next plays. He's got to go out and score. He's got to go out and create. And to be fair to him, the last few games, his goal creation and goal involvement is pretty high. But I think it's quite something for him to do that. And I wonder in many ways he may regret that kind of celebration.
Well, even when you heard him talking after the game, it felt like he was sort of rowing back that celebration a little bit. And I sort of expected Jacob Murphy to get asked about it and for him to sort of front up and say, look, yeah, I didn't like what I heard from the fans, or, I've heard all this outside noise. But he didn't really do that, did he? He sort of said, well, you've got the quote there, haven't you? So
we have to be calm, stay level-headed, never get too high, and never get too low, because we know results will come. 1 win changes a lot, but staying level, staying calm, and picking up points where you need to make the table look a lot different. I actually agree with a lot of what he said there, but also it does not reflect the celebration.
Talking about being calm and level-headed. But on Jacob Murphy is the more wider point. We've said for months on this pod, I think the fans will all agree, a very, very good squad player. Okay, he's direct, he offers something different. He will always graft for the team. You can tell he loves the club. Eddie Howe really rates him. But I think some of the frustration that has been around Jacob Murphy is deserved, because he had such a good pre-season. He got the first 2 or 3 games on that right as a starting player. Didn't capitalise on the summer that he had in the pre-season. Really struggled to hold down his place. Hasn't been consistent enough. So it's all well and good him having a good summer. It's all well and good him scoring 2 goals, getting 2 assists against Brentford. But as you say, if we then go to Brentford at home and he's anonymous, and then he really struggles at Ipswich, he can't really have any complaints that fans are maybe getting on his back. And as you say, if Newcastle, if he wants Newcastle to not go out and sign a right winger, he needs to really be laying down a marker in the next couple of games to say, you don't need to spend the money.
Yeah, certainly so. And just on the point that I made about this week, because I think that's been the thing to come out of the game against Leicester City. Now, I've been actually quite pleasantly surprised that the majority of people across social media, where there are some fan accounts who can get lost in it all, have been actually quite down to earth about this. And it goes back to what Jacob Murphy's kind of said there. You need to keep building on it. And that's what Newcastle United need to do. There's no good beating Leicester and then going out of the cup against Brentford, or even going through against Brentford, then losing to Ipswich. Newcastle United, I think, need to go on a sustained period of good results and good performances, 5 or 6 of those, head into the new year in good spirits. It's doable because you've got Villa, you've got Manchester United, I think you've got Wolves and Spurs maybe as well coming up. Cup game, hopefully a semi-final as well. It's very, very doable that Newcastle can head into January and get through January with quite a few points and a foot inside the final of the Carabao Cup. They have to, though, get through this week with 2 wins out of 2.
Well, I think, as you mentioned there, it's been quite unusual that everybody seems to be on the same page about this, whether it's us, whether it's the fans, whether it's social media, whether it's Eddie Howe himself, who spoke about it on Saturday. That Leicester win was great, but it was part 1 of 2, or it was part 1 of 3. And if they don't beat Leicester, or they don't beat Brentford, or they struggle at Ipswich, then that Leicester win suddenly becomes, again, an example of that frustration that we've seen, at inconsistency, getting really good results, really strong performances, and not being able to back them up.
Yeah, most certainly. So, I mean, what do you think the difference was against Leicester to what we'd seen against the likes of West Ham? A club. Okay, West Ham have got these stars and they shouldn't be down there, but they are down there. We've seen what's happened since. They've not performed overly fantastic. What was the difference between the Leicester performance and the West Ham performance, do you think?
Well, I think one, again, and I don't want to keep reiterating it, but Leicester were so bad. I mean, they were horrendous. But also, we're finally seeing Newcastle taking their chances. They took their chances really well. We haven't mentioned it yet, but the first 2 goals from set-piece routines, how often have we said this season that something needs to change with those corners and those free kick routines? First goal was absolutely brilliant. It was something that we've seen from Newcastle in stages over the last couple of years. And even the second goal, a really well-worked free kick. That was pretty simple but effective. So the performance, I don't think, was too dissimilar to what we saw at Brighton and West Ham, when Newcastle had created a lot. It was just this time they were finding the back of the net with them.
I didn't feel they had to get out of second gear, really.
Yeah,
I think once they got the third goal, it was very much just sit back and contain. And towards the end, they were just passing it around, waiting for the final whistle, which is good. It shows their dominance, but also means they've conserved their energy. And Eddie Howe could make substitutions ahead of Wednesday. So that will be key.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when that third goal in, I sort of turned to my colleagues around me. I was like, right, get Will Osula on, give him a good run out, because he's got 40 minutes of a game that probably isn't up for grabs anymore. As you say, he made 3 changes at once. Then he brought Osula on later in the game. As you say, he got to rest the likes of Tino. He got to rest Bruno. Isak came off with about 30 minutes to go. So, as you say, just reserve that energy for Wednesday.
And how important was it to get that win, but also perform as well as they did, given how important Wednesday is?
I mean, massive. Look, it'll be a huge confidence boost for them, because, if they'd lost on Saturday, or they dropped points on Saturday, not only would they have had a real confidence dint, but the fans would be going into that game on Wednesday really, really tense. I don't know if I'll speak for you, but certainly for myself, I'm now confident going into Wednesday, which I probably shouldn't be, because this is the Newcastle United of 24-25, and we know that they can't string results together, but they played so well on Saturday, and they play so well at home more often than not, coupled with Brentford's horrendous away record, coupled with the fact that it's one of those games where we usually see St James's Park raise it up a notch. The importance of the game won't be lost on the players. So look, maybe this will come back to bite us, but I'm more confident than I was going into Wednesday than I was Saturday. And the players will feel it.
Fingers crossed your confidence isn't misplaced. Do you know the only competitive victory on the road that Brentford have picked up?
I don't.
Colchester in the first round of the League Cup.
Don't add to my confidence even more.
A massive boost for Newcastle United. I think, the season really probably does hinge on Wednesday. The best chance to get into Europe, best chance of winning a cup. And I think, if Newcastle can get all the way this time, they could probably lift it. Although we don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah,
they've got to get through
on the
Wednesday, because
part 1 of 3.
Yeah, they've faced Brentford in the quarterfinal stage, and we all remember what happened there and the Steve Bruce. Don't want to repeat that.
Just before we move on to the next point, there was a question you asked me before we came on air, and I think it's one we should put to the chat now, is what happens to Newcastle and Eddie Howe and the pressure on the club if they don't beat Brentford and Ipswich? Because it'll be very interesting to see what the mood's like, because, as we say, they've done really well on Saturday, but does all that pressure jump straight back on if they get beat against Brentford? I mean, it probably does, so. But it'll be interesting to see what people think about it.
I think so, and I've mentioned this on previous episodes, and I've mentioned it kind of early in the show. I think that's why Eddie Howe needs to go on a sustained run of form of 5 or 6 good results, not just 2 or 3, because always in the back of your head, you're thinking, are they going to build on this? Are they going to be able to do so? And I even think if they win the next 2 games, there's still going to be that kind of process in most people's mind, think, will they beat Villa, will they beat Manchester United? Because the table's so close, you want to be obviously beating them, and if you do beat them, go shoot that you shoot up. But if you don't, where you left. But I think you could even ask the question: is what happens if they get through against Brentford but lose to Ipswich? Obviously, Eddie Howe taking Newcastle into a semi-final of a cup gives them even more credit in the bank. But at the same time, if your league form isn't picking up or isn't sustained in a positive manner, questions will be asked. So I think it's still a big month for Eddie Howe. I still think there's a lot of work to be done. And I think he and the players, as Bruno alluded to in his post-match interview as well, know that this is just the starting point. We've been here before. They've got to build on it, and they've got to do it over a longer period of time. But let us know in the comments your thoughts on anything we've spoken about so far. Let's look at the team that started on Saturday. Then we'll start with the midfield three of Joe Linton, Bruno and Tonali. Tonali playing as that 6. Bruno being allowed to get forward a little bit more, and Joe Linton essentially at times playing as left back, really. He really offered protection to Lewis Hall. That's where we'll start with the work of Joe Linton. We've seen him in recent weeks being played on the flanks, and he impressed, but it looks like he's going to be now deployed back in that kind of left central role where he's offering protection to the full back. I mean, were you impressed with him on Saturday? And the second question is, how important is he to Lewis Hall's success this season, do you think?
Well, I'll start with the second section first and say that he's crucial because, I mean, not just to Lewis Hall, but just going back to last season, how crucial he was to Dan Burn when Dan Burn would go on these really impressive runs of form. It was usually when Joe Linton was offering that protection in front of him. And when you've got a player like Lewis Hall, who we'll touch on in depth in quite a bit, when you've got someone like that bombing forward and really wanting to make progressive runs forward and overlapping, as we saw on Saturday, having someone like Joe Linton who will sit in and cover is absolutely massive. I go again back to that Arsenal game, which was probably one of Lewis Hall's best of the season against Saka. And how many times did we see Joe Linton essentially playing as a left-sided centre-back alongside Hall? So he's incredibly important to the team. He's incredibly important to that left side. Eddie Howe continues to bang on about how he can play in left wing, right wing, centre midfield, anywhere really, apart from up front. And I think that's just such a rare asset to have. Someone where you can, I mean, from one week to the next, we don't know where he's going to be playing, but it doesn't really matter because he always shows up.
You see, I'm going to disagree with you. I think it does matter, and I think this is what Eddie Howe now needs to settle on. Was Saturday's team his best team, bottom aside, and will he stick with it from now on in? Because I think when you do stick with a team, and I get there's certain situations where you need to adapt and you might have to play certain different players because of the opposition you're facing, but for the large part, you should be sticking with your first 11. I do think it was probably his best side that he's available to pick. Botman obviously being fit would come back in for Dan Burn most likely, but I think the more he sticks with a settled team, the better Newcastle United will get. I think he can strike up partnerships. Joe Linton, Lewis Hall, and Anthony Gordon. You can have a little triangle there, and that can really benefit Newcastle United. They know what each other is going to do. The more Tonali players as that number 6 can get on the same platform as Bruno, and they can work really well together. I think it's really crucial now that we start seeing really the same team going week in, week out.
I think on the point about the best team available to them, I would probably agree. I think obviously in terms of quality, Barnes would get in there, but I think in terms of Barnes not being able to play on the right and Gordon just being so much better on the left, I probably agree. I think that does probably highlight though the fact that Newcastle, again, as people will be bored of us saying, need to go out inside a right winger just to really raise the level on that flank. But just on what you said about hoping this is the team going forward, I hope now we've seen enough for this midfield to really show that it can work. Joe Linton playing the left side of the 3 is his bread and butter. The real question was, can Tonali play the 6, which I think we've seen already he can. And I think Bruno is getting a lot better at refinding the form in the 8. I think he's looking a lot more confident further up the pitch. He chipped in with a goal on Saturday.
Just looks freer.
He looks freer.
I think it's because he hasn't got that defensive responsibility. Now, there are going to be times when Bruno will sit and allow Tonali to go forward, and as long as they're filling in for one another, that's fine. But I think for the large part of games, you will just see Bruno being that little bit more advanced, and it just frees him up when he hasn't got to be the anchor man, and it's paying off.
But this is the thing now. I think we've seen enough of Sandro Tonali in the right-sided 8 position, and we've seen enough of him, admittedly not as much of him in the 6. I don't think you can question the fact that he's better as the most central midfield option, the one who's playing deepest. Now, what I don't want to then see is if Bruno can't keep this form up in the 8, I don't want to see him then going back into the 6 at the expense of Tonali. And again, that raises a bigger question. And again, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but if the three of them can't play together and Bruno just, for whatever reason, can't find his feet in the 8, despite him going on the record and saying it's his favourite midfield position, do you sacrifice Bruno and say, look, if somebody wants to come in with 100 million, we take it because we've got somebody who can play in the 6 and is fantastic and we can build a team around? I'm not sure. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but
I've seen a lot of chatter over the weekend about that, given Man City's current troubles and whether Bruno is the man on their radar. And I have seen quite a few Newcastle United fans on social media saying, look, if they come in with a bid of 80 to 100 million, you probably would accept it to allow Newcastle United to invest. Now, for what it's worth, I think probably not in January, but I think in the summer, Newcastle will end up losing one of their big name stars. And it's just a question of obviously who it is, but who you would want it to be. Who, no one wants to sell Bruno, no one wants to sell Isak, but I do think one of either Isak or Bruno will end up going in the summer.
I think you'll be hard pressed to find anybody who would rather lose Isak than Bruno.
Yeah. And it's frustrating to say that, but that's to allow Newcastle to reinvest and to grow as a squad and to go forward. And what you need is reassurances from Tonali and his camp that he's happier. We think he is. We don't think he's wanting to move back to Italy at all. There was obviously reports in the Italian press last week which were just absolute nonsense. The more he plays, the happier he will be. The more confident he gets, the better we'll see of him. And it's just a case of how do you replace Bruno if indeed he does end up moving on. But I would say I think Newcastle fans, and we're both Newcastle fans, have to get ready for a big name sale. And that's just the way the current PSR rules, make Newcastle work. It's unfortunate, but that is the way that it currently is at the moment. But yes, let us know in the comments your thoughts on that midfield 3. I thought what was really interesting as well, that when Harvey Barnes came on the 64th minute, he came on for Jacob Murphy. Usually when he does come on, we often see him put onto the left and Gordon switched on to the right. Gordon stayed on the pitch until the 81st minute. We didn't see Barnes put on that left when Gordon was on the pitch, which I thought was really quite interesting because that's been the other big talking point over the last few weeks and months. Is it Harvey Barnes on the left at the expense of Gordon because Gordon can still do a job, but Barnes can only play on the left? And is Gordon happy, etc., etc.? I thought it was quite a big moment though. And I might be reading too much into it, but I thought the fact that Barnes was on the pitch and he was told, you play on the right, we're keeping Gordon here on the left, despite the fact that the job was done as well.
It's not the first time he's done it in the last couple of games. So maybe we are starting to see glimpses of him trying it out and saying, look, we've tried sacrificing Gordon and bringing you on or letting Barnes play in his favourite position and it hasn't worked because essentially you're really detrimenting one of your most important players. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, I thought Gordon was fantastic on Saturday, despite not maybe getting the credit he deserves. He had James Justin on toast all afternoon, and I think again it just serves as a massive reminder you've got to try and keep him on the left. And if that means trying to shoehorn Barnes into a role that, if I'm honest, he's hardly ever played in. I mean, you look at the stats across not as just his Newcastle career, but his time at Leicester, he very, very rarely plays on the right. So I understand why Howe did it and why Howe was moving Gordon there rather than him, but I don't think the experiment worked, and I think you need to try and find a way of playing both. And if that means Barnes is on the right, then it means Barnes is on the right.
So you'd end up playing Barnes ahead of Jacob Murphy, you think, until January?
No, I'm not saying that, but I mean, if Harvey Barnes is coming on the pitch, as we've said for weeks on this pod, I haven't really enjoyed seeing Gordon being shifted from pillar to post, not knowing where he's going to be playing week in, week out. I doubt he would enjoy it. We've spoke for weeks about what's wrong with Anthony Gordon, and I always thought that was the issue, the fact that he couldn't have a consistent run of games in his favourite position, or any position really. In terms of who I'd play before January, I think I'd probably stick with Murphy for now. It's not ideal, but he's scoring goals, he's chipping in with goals. And I think Barnes is a really good option to have off the bench.
Yep, indeed. Let us know in the comments your thoughts. We've got Graham saying, hopefully if Newcastle get past Brentford, it's important that players and management don't get too excited as focus is needed for Ipswich. He feels last time After Southampton semi-final, Newcastle lost their focus up to the final. I think many people would agree with you. Tony says, I think we all know Murphy is a good squad player, but is he going to take us to the next level? Not for me. Let's try and get Mbeumo, who I'm sure would improve us. However, will be very sought after. Yep, I totally agree with that. He's going to cost you a pretty penny. Richard says, would love to ask the guys, does he stick with the team on a regular basis to try and find some sort of consistency, as we've just said? Yeah. 100% is what we need, although that will be knocked off against Ipswich because Joelinton is suspended. So Willock will probably come in, you would think, for that game. Graham also adds 100 million plus, as this will be the only or quickest way to grow. Isak much more tricky to replace, but a Bruno sale could give us 2 or 3 quality additions. Gary says we won't and don't need to sell Isak. He'll still have 3 years on his contract next summer. Unless there's selling 3 fringe players could recoup as much profit as Bruno's sale, taking into account wages, time for Mitchell to earn his crust. But again, we go back to the point, like Newcastle United can sell. Reports that Sean Longstaff has been made available, that would be pure profit. Again, I don't think that's someone that anyhow would necessarily want to throw out the door, but he is probably the only one that you could really make pure profit off. You're not going to get much for Miguel Almiron. You're not going to get anything for Callum Wilson because he's injured again. You're going to get pennies for Kieran Trippier. Newcastle United, as we've said for many, many months, they just haven't got players you can sell who you want to sell, and that's going to be the issue going forward in January. It's not because the club don't want to sell players. I just genuinely think they haven't got too many players they can't sell. Now you're going to argue with me because I know there's a piece coming up, but we discussed it this morning, and it was, what was the magic number? 7?
7, yeah. I mean, I think I'm not going to argue with you. I think on the point of selling fringe players, yeah, all well and good they have fringe players they can sell. Vlachodimos should probably be on his way out. Matt Target should be on his way out. Players of that ilk will be on their way out. But as you've just mentioned, you're not gonna recoup much money for them. And then you go into that section of players that you can probably afford to lose, and they might get you a little bit. But how many players have they really got? You've mentioned 3 there, and Wilson, Almiron, and Trippier. Again, you won't get much for them. And then you start looking at, okay, maybe Sean Longstaff, maybe Joe Willock if you were to get your way, and maybe even Harvey Barnes, which, has started to get discussed more and more among the fan base and among the press. So there isn't that many players that Newcastle have that they can, really cash in on.
True says, problem with selling is that Howe doesn't want to sell, and that's a big issue. I think that's unfair.
I do sort of get the point Truls is making. I don't think it's that he doesn't want to sell. I think he's just been really reluctant to have these massive whole-scale overhauls of squads in one window. He's like to try and keep the leaders in the squad. He likes having the likes of Kieran Trippier and Callum Wilson in the dressing room, even if they're not playing week in, week out. And he also doesn't like to see loads of players leaving because he knows that means they've got to then go out and sign a lot of players as well. So I don't think that he doesn't want to sell, but we all know how much he values that leadership group. And unfortunately, that leadership group is full of players that might not be playing much anymore.
And just given reports of recent weeks or since the last time we spoke, do you still remain confident about January that there'll be at least one coming in?
I stick by the fact I think there'll be one in, one out. I think it is looking more and more like if they don't get one out, they will struggle to get one in. But I think they will be able to maybe do a little bit of business. Again, though, the thing that is only going to rage up until January is where they strengthen.
Truel says Longstaff will be pure profit, and we have Miley to take his place. Him just working back to full fitness, and I guess if Miley can maintain the form we saw when he broke onto the scene, then he's a wonderful replacement to have. Maybe not just for Longstaff, but even maybe, shall we say it, for Bruno as well. Nice of Matthias Cunha to get himself probably suspended for the next 7 games, and who knows?
Your boy in hot water.
Play his final game for Wolves and arrive in Newcastle in January. It will be some sign. Let us know your picks for January. Realistic picks, though. That would be much appreciated. Let's talk about Lewis Hall then, because I know you've been mightily impressed with him. Looking like worth every penny that Newcastle paid for him.
Yes, yeah. And not only am I impressed with him, we put a poll in our WhatsApp this morning, and I asked people for their man of the match. And unsurprisingly, Lewis Hall was the runaway leader, won it by about 100. Interestingly, I would have probably had Lewis Hall first, Sandro Tonali second, but the fans have gone Hall first, Jacob Murphy second,
Interesting.
Alexander Isak third, Sandro Tonali fourth, and then Bruno down in fifth, and then other down in sixth. Lewis Hall, I mean, it's just amazing, isn't he? Absolutely fantastic. In terms of the stats, he had the most touches of anyone on the pitch, 108. He had the most accurate passes with 73. He created the most chances with 5. Some people will say he got 1 assist. I'm going to give him both because I know there was a slight deflection on the second, but I think we should give him it. Other stats include the fact that no Premier League fullback has more progressive passes in the league than him this season, 153. And do you want for us to really blow your mind?
Go on then.
Of all the under 21 fullbacks in the Premier League, Lewis Hall ranks first for forward passes, progressive passes, blocked shots, crosses into the box, and through ball passes. He ranks second for aerial duels won, interceptions, and passes. And he ranks third for expected assists. He has proven, week in, week out, that Chelsea were terribly ill-informed to get rid of him, and Newcastle have really struck gold. I thought Saturday was a really complete performance. Defensively, we spoke about it. He looked assured with Joe in front of him. What I found really good about him on Saturday was how he wanted to carry the ball forward. He looked a threat down the left. He looked a threat through the middle at times. And as we saw for one of the assists, that overlap of Anthony Gordon was really, really what we've missed from him. We've missed him creating chances like that. Looking at the bigger picture, again, I go back to that England setup and you look at Ben Chilwell, exiled at Chelsea, Luke Shaw, can't stay fit, Rico Lewis, playing in a really, really unusually bad Manchester City team. Thomas Tuchel knows him really well from Chelsea, and I think he'll be looking now at, right, what's my team going to be? I think Lewis Hall is in with a real shout of being Thomas Tuchel's first choice left back at England, and he deserves it.
I would agree with that. Every time you watch him, he just seems to get better and better. Didn't have the best of outings against Brentford, and hopefully everything that went wrong for him against Brentford, the G-Tech, is not replicated down on St James Park on Wednesday, because it's likely to be a strong side, if not the same side for Newcastle, same side for Brentford that they played against Newcastle a couple of weeks ago, and we all know that Birmingham got the better of Hall. One of the few times he has been beaten and beaten badly this season, so hopefully he's learned from that. But yeah, he looks like a man who's been doing it a very, very long time.
Doesn't look 20 years old, does he?
No,
at all.
Not at all. And we go to the bigger picture, really, and that is, if we look at Lewis Hall and we're all singing his praises this time last year, we were all questioning Eddie Howe, saying, we know what's going on. We're crying out for an out-and-out left back. Where is he? What's happening with him? Eddie Howe has been proven right. We just keep everything crossed that William Osula follows the same path, right?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, that would be nice. Yeah, look, again, it's something that, isn't lost on anyone. Fans keep making the point of it that Howe was probably right to keep him just closed off maybe to the rest of the Premier League for the first season. But anybody you speak to about Lewis Hall says the work that he's put in on the training ground personally is astonishing. Really, really studying his opponents, working out how to get better defensively, working out how to get better one-on-ones. And as we say, we see it week in, week out, the things he can do with the ball rather than going backwards. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, 28 million looks a snip already, isn't it?
I want to talk about Isak as well. He got another goal, but just his footwork, it must be terrifying as an opposition defender to go up against him.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the passes he was playing on Saturday, some of the touches he was playing, the way he dribbles with the ball. He did it in the second half, didn't he, where I think he teed up Murphy and Murphy sent it over the bar. How he sort of wriggles through the defenders and knocks the ball through their legs. We saw it obviously against Van de Ven, didn't we, in that iconic photo where he left them on the ground. But centre-backs just don't know how to deal with them when he's running at them at full speed. Took his goal very well. Obviously got himself an assist. Just an absolutely fantastic performance.
We have got, surprisingly, maybe to some, quite a few comments, though, of those watching live who say Alexander Isak misses too many chances. So Stephen on YouTube says, just my opinion here, I think Isak misses far too many chances and is too hitty-missy form-wise to ever be mentioned in the greatest of all time category. But he is really good. And John says, as good as Isak was and has been this season, I still worry about the amount of chances he is missing. He should have had a hat-trick easily.
I think it would be a concern if he wasn't scoring. But I do get the point. I mean, one-on-one this season, how many times we sat there and said the Isak of last season would probably score them, but he's in such a great vein of form. I do get the point.
Because he should have scored that one in the first half. And he back passes it really to the goalkeeper.
Yeah, and he did. He had a similar chance against Liverpool. He's had a couple of spells this season. I mean, he should have had 2 at Chelsea at Stamford Bridge when he rounded the goalkeeper. Brentford didn't score. I get the point. But then when you look at the goals he does score, it doesn't make up for it. Am I just sort of clinging on to not wanting to bash him? I don't know. But I do get why people are saying it.
Niall says Isak needs to do more work one-on-ones and training, but apart from that, he's very good. Trill says Isak 1 goal and assist, not too bad to be frank. And Graham says Isak dribbles very much like Beardsley. Both Murphy and Isak should have had hat-tricks. I agree. I have compared Isak to not just Beardsley, but also Lionel Messi.
I was just about to say Messi.
I just watch him and just
think that close control, isn't it? Where you think,
has he got Velcro on his boots?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it certainly is, but it's an absolute joy to watch. We've got a few questions about transfers as well. Davey sent in one via email and said, if Newcastle United do end the transfer window without having signed a player, will that be deemed a failure?
Yes, because 3 transfer windows in a row without signing anyone of note for the first team or someone who's going to improve Eddie Howe's first 11 is, I mean, not good enough, but also just goes to highlight on a bigger picture how unfit these rules are for Premier League in the modern game. And again, we're talking about Eddie Howe's team trying to find consistency, trying to get into Europe. And as we've touched on many times on this podcast, you need fresh faces to do that, not just because of the quality they'll bring, but also the lift they're going to bring the team, the fact that he's going to have more options to rotate with. So it will be a failure if they don't, but I think Newcastle have set their stall out early to make sort of soften the blow if they don't get anyone, if that makes sense. We all know the reasons why.
In the press conference, Sydney, before Brentford, that he said something along the lines, unless they sell, he doesn't expect them to be busy.
Yeah, I've got the quote here. And he says, I keep saying the same thing about January. I wouldn't expect us to be in a position to be too active in the market. As we currently stand, these things can change. If we trade players, that's different. But if we don't trade players, I would expect us to be quiet.
Now, some people would say they're playing a game.
Pleading poverty and saying we don't have any money. Don't put Newcastle tax on us. Others will maybe say they don't have any money. They're not going to spend.
It's the PSR rules, isn't it? And that's something that Newcastle don't want to be stung by. Again, you can send in any questions to us via the EIBW podcast at reachplc.com. Another one that came in was from Steve, and he asks, do you think Newcastle United already have their targets in terms of players that they want in January?
Yeah, I do believe so. I mean, we spoke to Eddie Howe a couple of months ago, and he said that. I think we spoke in October and asked him, and he said, no, these plans won't be sort of taking place until much closer to January. I think from the end of November onwards, they'll have had their meetings and said, right, this is who we want. Now, look, this can obviously change because, as we saw with Callum Wilson's injury last week, you know, a big blow to Isak will change their thinking. A big blow to, I was just about to say Nick Pope there, but Nick Pope is injured. So you get what I mean. You know, I think the plans will be very fluid. And again, it will depend on who they can get out. So not only do they need to know who they want, but they need to be making inroads to sell players as well.
We've got Truel saying we need to buy a right winger and a right centre-back way before we spend 20 to 25 million on Chris Rigg, who's been linked again. Although I
say Chris Wood there.
Well, I don't think Chris Rigg
I would take Chris
leaving.
Wood for 20.
Would you?
20 million.
Bargain. I don't think Chris Rigg will be leaving Sunderland anytime soon. Graham says Ferguson from Brighton has been spoken about on loan. Any chance you think that might happen?
Look, I wouldn't be surprised. I think Evan Ferguson famously scored a hat-trick against Newcastle at the very start of last season. Had real struggles with injuries, but you only have to watch it to know there's a real talent there. You know, really, really good player that Brighton have got in the hands. He can't get in the team ahead of João Pedro. So, look, I'm not saying Newcastle are going to go sign it on loan, but if it's true that Brighton want to loan him, I think you'll have a lot of suitors for him.
And Helen has emailed in to ask whether you think Newcastle United, not just in January, but in the summer, will be targeting players already here in England from the Premier League or Championship, or whether you think they'll be targeting those on the continent.
I think it'll be a bit of both. I mean, again, Eddie Howe was asked specifically about this recently, and sort of said that he's open. He doesn't matter. He doesn't really mind if they've got Premier League experience or not. You only have to look at Isak, Botman, and Bruno to suggest that it doesn't matter if they have Premier League experience or not. So I don't think they'll pigeonhole themselves to just signing players from one or the other.
We've got Scott here who's written in, and it's quite a lengthy question, but I will read it out. In his defence, he sent it in for the last Monday show, but I missed it. But I actually think it's quite an interesting question. So, Scott, if you're watching, I'm going to read this out. If you've changed your mind because it has been a week since you sent it in, apologies in advance. He says, personally, I think Howe's biggest flaw has been his inability to include youth in the squad. Miley was in the squad for a month only to be dropped to the under-21s due to his Howe described as competition for places. The only reason he was used so much last season is because Howe had no other options, and I'd argue he offers more than some of our other midfielders. When we played Wimbledon, the only youth player in the squad was Alex Murphy, who got no minutes. Surely with Mitchell and Situ and games such as Bromley coming in the new year, Howe has to look internally for solutions. What does Almiron or Target offer that a Sanusi or Harrison doesn't? We cannot constantly go on about PSR while we're ignoring potential solutions in-house. We keep focusing on possible expensive new signings when that mentality is why we are in the mess we are currently in.
It's a good point. And I don't think one win over Leicester, where there was no youth players involved, will have changed Scott's decision from a week ago. It's a very, very good point. Now, on Sanusi, just to start with, because he was obviously the talk of the summer, played really well in the Salah Cup, played really well in the pre-season trips to Japan and whatnot. And everyone thought, okay, he'll get a game in that first game against Wimbledon. Now, I always go back to the question that I asked Eddie Howe in the summer about Sanusi going on loan, and he said, well, he's not ready to go on loan yet. We want to keep him in-house. Now, I sort of took that as, okay, we're not going to see Sanusi this season. Been really surprised that we haven't seen Alex Murphy. The players we have seen on the bench don't get a run in. Ben Parkinson. Then you look at someone like Sean Neve, who was the top scorer in the Premier League under 18s last season, who was going to be on the bench for Liverpool, didn't get a look on the bench. We've talked about Kieran Trippier going. If he goes, they need a right back. They've got Leo Shahar, who is signed from Wolves. He hasn't been in a match day squad. Travis Hearns has been training with the first team. We've hardly seen him in a senior squad. So there is amazing youth talent there that Eddie Howe, for whatever reason, doesn't think is ready. Now, I would then say, well, if he doesn't think Will Osula's ready, and Will Osula has played 25 Premier League games across Sheffield United and Newcastle, then I doubt we're going to get to see many of the youth team in the coming months, which is a shame because, as I said, there's some talented players there.
We just look back to how we treated Lewis Hall, bedded him in, didn't throw him straight in, and we have to trust the manager. And if we can see similar rises to the top as we've seen with Hall, and we can see that in those names that you've mentioned there, then you've got to back the manager, haven't you?
Yeah, but it is a shame though when you look at how well Miley did, and whether that was because he had no choice to play Miley. The fact of the matter is, Miley proved to be, a huge asset to Newcastle in a world of PSR where you need players that don't cost anything and they can be sold fit down the line. So.
Well, I did have a question over the weekend from a fan who got in touch on X, and they said, "Where's Lewis Miley?" And the understanding is that he's just easing him back in. He doesn't really have a need to play him at the moment, although obviously what he offers is something a little bit different. But when Eddie Howe deems him to be match fit, deems him to be ready, do you think we will see more of him?
I'm going to be totally honest, no, and I don't think it's anything to do with Lewis Miley. I think if everybody's fit, like they have been in the last couple of weeks, give or take a couple of games, I don't know who you can drop out of the subs to play him. And I get that sounds weird because you've got someone like Matt Target on the bench, but when Kieran Trippier was out injured, you only had Target and Kelly on the bench. So if you drop Matt Target out, you're left with one defender. So I think Miley is, one, as you say, being protected a little bit because of the injury that he had, because he's only young. But I also think it is dependent on who else is on the bench around him.
I think with that in mind, and I agree with you, actually, I think Miley, because of the experience he had last season, he then would have to go out on loan in January. I think the other names you mentioned, like Sanusi and Hearns, they're at an age where keeping them in-house is probably a little bit more beneficial because obviously you've got the case of moving away and all that. It's not just about playing regular football. I don't know, Cambridge United or whatever. It's about everything else that goes with it. And of course, you grew up a lot quicker doing that, and that's brilliant. But, it can come too quickly for players. But with Miley, I think the first team experience he's had it would be right for him to then go on loan to a Championship side, because he would smash the Championship up.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
And keeping him in-house, I don't see the benefit.
The one thing I will say is that I'm glad that Miley is playing for under 21s. He has played in the last couple of weeks, because we've seen Alex Murphy this season very rarely get game time for under 21s. Grant Kowal's had his injury issues. He hasn't really been playing up until the last couple of weeks. These players need to be moved out and loaned on if they're not even going to play for the under 21s. As I mentioned, the likes of Hearns, Sanusi, Shahar, Sean Neve, they're all playing at youth level, so at least they're getting game time, even though it's not sort of a first team club lower down the pyramid.
Well, there's a lot of talk about William Osula in the comments. Niall says Osula was suddenly ready this week, and he also asked if Howe has no intention of using some of the bench players. Why are they there? Graham says, I think the focus must be to get consistency and up the league before the likes of Miley play just for the sake of it. And Niall says, I think Howe could have brought Osula on a lot earlier. Osula, look, I don't think he looked out of place when he came on. He had a good physical battle with their number 5. He had one really good run where I think people got off their seats. I think the physical battle more than anything, though, will put him in good stead. I think that was really important. And when I say he didn't look out of place, I'm not saying he started against Brentford, by the way. He started against them.
Of course.
A rest. But what I'm saying is, I think
you don't notice a natural drop off.
Yeah,
really,
I think he took his opportunity just to get into the mind of Eddie Howe and the fans and think, oh man, there is a player there. And I think, had he come on the pitch and he'd wilted under the physical battle with a defender, then we'd be seeing a lot different. But I honestly think he looked quite at home.
I thought I was watching him quite closely because, as I said, as soon as Newcastle scored their 3rd goal in the 50th minute, I was like, right, get him on. Give him 40 minutes. He didn't get 40 minutes, but I think, I'm just looking for it now, I think he got 30, I want to say, 20. He got longer than he has in recent weeks. I'm just scrolling down to find it here.
He came on the 73rd.
Okay. So he got a little bit longer than he has recently, not by much. I was watching him and I thought a couple of things didn't come off for him. He was trying, he was making good runs. He lost out in a couple of battles, but I was just glad that we actually saw him because, he has looked good earlier this season.
And just to go back to Niall's point, who said, he was suddenly ready this time around. I get you. But as we said in previous weeks, there was always going to come a point with Wilson's injuries that Eddie Howe's hand was forced. Eddie Howe does not want to be playing a William Osula. He doesn't want to be bringing him on with 20 minutes to go. That's quite clear. He wants to be keeping him on the training pitch and working with him. But right now, he hasn't got any other options. So that's why we're going to see more of him. I think it won't be through willingness or want. I think it'll be quite reluctant, but I think Eddie Howe probably accepts that it's really his only other option unless you play Gordon up there.
And if Newcastle hadn't been 3-0 up, I don't think we would have seen him. If that game had been 0-0 or even 1-0, I think he would have kept Isak on for a lot longer. So you can say, he looked ready Saturday. I think it was because of the context of the game. But as you say, with Callum Wilson now out and Newcastle potentially not going to sign a striker in January, and the fact that, as we've just mentioned, he's not bringing any youth players through, Parkinson's not getting a look in anymore in terms of the matchday squad, he needs Osula because Osula now is his backup striker. So he needs to start playing him more.
Shez saying they trust the manager with Osula's plan. I think Osula will have his time, especially if we stay in the cup. Tough thing to balance between having the pressure to win and giving fringe players a chance to impress. We've got Gary saying that he'll get more minutes the next month or two because Isak needs to be managed. No way Isak can play every single game. Graham says Osula's next minutes will be against Bromley. Roger says, will Osula start on Wednesday night? I don't think so. I think you might see more of him if Newcastle are winning again 2-3-0 up. But I think the team on Wednesday will be the team.
Be the same.
Yeah, maybe Trippier for Livramento, maybe.
Potentially.
But other than that, I think it'll be unchanged. Because I think why change a winning side, right?
Yeah, especially in a game of that magnitude.
The table is so tight. Newcastle are in 12th on 23 points, but it is so close. A couple of wins and you will shoot up the table. And that's why I felt it was really important as well. Newcastle got the win on Saturday, keep within touching distance of those teams above them. But Nottingham Forest on 28 points in 4th. As we said, Newcastle in 12th, Man United in 13th on 22. I mean, that is 6 points separating 4th to 13th. I cannot remember a table like this.
No, it's a really good season. This is not just sort of, I mean, well, not for Newcastle at the minute, but just in terms of the upsets that we're getting.
But look, beat Ipswich, beat Villa.
Yeah, but look,
beat Man United.
we said this about if they'd beaten West Ham and if they'd beaten Everton and if they'd beaten Brighton and Fulham, they'd be challenging Chelsea and Liverpool. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's all to play for, but it just means it's. I mean, look, it adds to the importance, doesn't it? Because they really can catch the top 5 or top 4 if they just put a little run together.
I'm just praying that they build on this. It was such a good performance, such a good result, but we've been here before. I'm just keeping everything crossed.
Yeah.
This is the actual turning point. We can say it until we're blue in the face. We can do every YouTube thumbnail possible in every way saying it. But the players and Eddie Howe have to take this opportunity now to build on the platform they've given themselves. They've set the bar, but they set the bar against Liverpool. They set the bar against Arsenal, and they fell so below it in the games that they lost since then.
Well, remember, after Chelsea, Arsenal, Forest.
I think we said it even after City, didn't we?
We said it, didn't we? Well, I said they were back on track, didn't say they were back.
We said they were back.
And then we went into that West Ham game so confident and they fell. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. Saturday was brilliant. I just want to reiterate again how shocking Leicester were, because really they probably were the worst team I've ever seen at St James's.
But it does put more pressure on Eddie Howe, doesn't, to a certain extent, because
it doesn't put more pressure on him. Come on.
No, but it does, because if they revert back to what we've seen after these sort of performances, it's not like it's the first or second time. It would be the third time it happens this season. And then people go, well, why does it keep happening?
I get what you mean, but there would be more pressure on him if they'd lost on Saturday.
You know, they would do. It's a different sort of pressure, because for where Newcastle United wants to be in Europe, we can't have it happening a third and fourth time in a season when this is the best opportunity to get back into Europe.
Of course. And if they don't go through in the cup and then they don't get a positive result at Ipswich, we will be sat on this pod in 7 days' time saying,
"Yeah, you're not in."
No, sorry, you will be sat on this podcast saying,
by myself,
another false dawn, another false hope. So
Merry Christmas, guys. But fingers crossed they can build on what was a fantastic Saturday. Do you want to just quickly talk about Callum Wilson? I said my piece last week on YouTube.
Really feel for him. As I tweeted last week, naturally he was getting a lot of abuse, which I don't agree with. It's not his fault that his body keeps failing him. But that being said, it's got to be over for him at Newcastle, isn't it? It would take something monumental for him to come back and stay fit and get back into the good graces of fans. I think his time's up.
I think we've seen the last of him. I don't think he'll score another goal for Newcastle United, which is frustrating.
Clip that.
That's fine.
It's frustrating. When he scores on his return in May.
And scores 12. But I'll tell you what's even more frustrating. A pet hate of mine is when you finish not on a round number. He's on 47 goals at the moment. If he doesn't get 50,
he needs 3 more.
Oh, I think like Supermax got 97.
I tweeted last week when he got injured again, just what I've said about him, not giving him personal abuse. He's been a fantastic servant, and a fan who was no doubt acting out in haste and out in frustration said he's not a fantastic servant for Newcastle United. He has been very well paid for doing half a job. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist.
I don't get. I mean, I understand the money argument to a certain extent, but
he's been a fantastic servant.
Yeah,
without no doubt about it.
Without some of his goals, Newcastle United might not even be in the Premier League.
And there's only Shearer who scored more goals in the Premier League than Callum Wilson.
Oh, if he hadn't been injured, we were talking about Callum Wilson well into the hundreds. But unfortunately, we're not. But was my theory about wrapping up and Cotton Wool and not playing him at all a good idea now, in hindsight?
No, I still don't agree with
that. Oh, yeah, man. We'd be sitting here saying, get Callum Wilson cashed in January. Genuinely stand by that. I think it would have been a good option. You don't want to. You never like admitting when I'm right. Fair enough. Right. You want to do this week's winner stays on?
With the usual winner stays on. So again, I'll just repeat the house rules. This is a series that we've done for the last 4 weeks. We had Les Ferdinand winning the striker. He stayed on, didn't he?
He did. I just want to jump in here. Graham says Wilson scores the winner in the cup final and goes off into the sunset, leaving a legacy.
Positivity we like. I like that from Graham. Fingers crossed. Or he gets 3 in the final and he rounds off on 50. And then he goes.
Or he's running through 1-on-1 to get the winner, and then his hamstring goes.
Yeah.
Happens to us.
No, I'd prefer Graham's finish there. Yeah, so winner stays on. We've done strikers, we've done centre midfielders, we've done centre backs, and we've done goalkeepers. And this week, it's managers.
Okay.
So again, the house rules. Andrew picks the winner to stay on out of two options. It is how well they were, how well they played, / how well they managed at Newcastle.
Okay.
So not what they did in their career, just how they were seen at St James's Park. So this is managers from the Premier League era. You ready?
It's a good job I didn't have Joe Harvey in it because I can tell you now.
Yeah,
he would have
well,
won.
I was going to do Joe Harvey. I was going to go pre-Prem, but I know how much you love Joe Harvey, and I thought he's going to win, so I'm not going to do it. Because I think I think I know who's going to win, but at least there's some feisty clashes in there. So,
not my favourite, how well they did.
Yeah, not your favourite, how well they did as Newcastle. Get involved in the comments if you're watching live, and we'll start with someone who I don't think will last very long in the game. We go Ruud Gullit or Steve McLaren.
Oh, I mean, that is two terrible Newcastle United managers.
One dropped Shearer, one took them down. Really, who? I mean,
do you know what though? Like,
worse?
yeah, you would. I think many people would say Steve McLaren, but I'm going to go Ruud Gullit.
Okay, Ruud Gullit or Big Sam Allardyce.
Big Sam
or Graham Souness. Again, not great to choose from.
I mean, Graham Souness got us to a quarter-final and a quarter-final in the UEFA Cup and a semi-final in the FA Cup. So there you go. It's got to be Graham Souness.
Graham Souness or Kenny Dalglish.
Kenny Dalglish helped get second, got to a final, but then did rip up the entertainer side. But then Graham Souness was a little bit of a so-and-so. That's difficult, that one, you know. I always think about Alan Shearer saying right man, wrong time. But can you forgive him for ripping up the entertainer side? I'm not too sure I can. Graham Souness.
Graham Souness or Glenn Roeder?
Glenn Roeder.
Glenn Roeder or the greatest coach the Premier League's ever seen, John Carver?
Glenn Roeder.
Glenn Roeder or Steve Bruce?
Glenn Roeder.
Glenn Roeder or Chris Hughton?
Chris Hughton.
Chris Hughton or the man who replaced him, Alan Pardew?
Oh,
championship winner, finishing 5th.
You know what? No, I'm going to go Chris Hughton because the amount of fires he had to put out that summer and then to get promoted without much investment at all, I'm going to go Chris Hughton.
Okay, Chris Hughton stays on, beats Alan Pardew. Chris Hughton or Sir Bobby Robson?
Sir Bobby Robson.
Sir Bobby Robson or Rafa Benitez?
Sir Bobby Robson.
Sir Bobby Robson.
I know it's coming. I knew that was coming. I suppose if you're thinking who did better, it would have to be Kevin Keegan. But then second spell, does it sour it slightly? Bobby's legacy intact. Oh, you know what you've done here, don't you? But then you can't really look past this, you know, what he did in the early years. Yeah. You
don't want to commit, do you?
Kevin Keegan.
Kevin Keegan stays on. And to finish, Kevin Keegan or Eddie Howe?
Kevin Keegan.
There you have it. Kevin Keegan wins.
Before we finish, we had the last episode of Just Take 3 over the weekend. Did you see it?
I did.
So it was about which managers you would actually want on the desert island with you.
Yeah, for their skills and what they would bring. Yeah.
So do you want to give us your 3?
Oh.
So I picked, ladies and gents, Graham Souness because he would just go out and hunt for the food. Sir Bobby Robson because he's just a gentleman and the elder statesman. And Chris Hughton because he's calm and collective.
Okay, I would go for Sir Bobby, because it's Sir Bobby. I would go for Rafa Benitez because he's got the best anecdotes of any manager I've ever met. Fantastic storyteller. He would keep me entertained. And number 3, I would go for, I feel like I need someone practical. You know what? I'd go Eddie Howe. He'd roll his sleeves up. He'd get us out of that mess, whatever left us on the desert island.
Of course, Sam Milner went for Rafa Benitez. He went for Eddie Howe with Jason Tyndall in his suitcase and Graham Souness.
Oh, there we go. So not too far off.
So if you haven't seen the episode, go back. It went out on Sunday on all platforms. Do take a listen. Do take a watch. Something just a little bit different and a little bit quirky. Thank you guys for tuning in on the Monday show. The last Monday show before Christmas with Aaron, because he's off next Monday. Birdie will be settling in. And just before we go, some good news in case you guys missed it. We nominated for the Regional Press Awards, which is kind of the Oscars of local press. What you like? It is. It is the one you want to win when you're in local press.
And can I just say, not to tempt faith, but Andrew was already convinced that because it's the same week as the Carabao Cup final, he will be spending all week in London.
I haven't told the missus that.
First picking up the award on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, and then watching Newcastle and the trophy drought on the Sunday. That would be a good week, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
an Oscar, then a trophy win. That would be good.
Do you know that weekend I'm booked to go on a stag do in Liverpool, but I've had to make sure the best man has made me in a refundable room.
Yeah,
because I've been like, they're going to get through against Brentford.
Yeah,
I will not say any more after that because we have to just keep ourselves grounded. But yeah, fantastic news about the nomination. Thank you to you guys for watching, listening, because it couldn't be done without you guys.
Yeah,
thank you to Aaron for all his efforts, and Lee Ryder, Simon Bird, Gibbo, Sam Mulner as well. It's a privilege to be doing this every week, isn't it?
Yeah, and as you've just touched on, if it wasn't for you who's listening and getting involved and enjoying the podcast as much as you do, we wouldn't be, as Andrew says, heading to it. So yeah, thank you to you guys, and hopefully the next couple of Monday shows and just the shows in general are more positive because Newcastle start winning again.
Yes, fingers crossed. And they've beaten Leicester, they will beat Brentford, and hopefully go on to beat Ipswich as well. Do you want to wish your fans a Merry Christmas?
Yeah, as you say, I'm off next Monday, so there'll be no post Brentford and post Ipswich wins recap from me. So I hope everyone that's listening and watching has a fantastic Christmas. I'll be back first Monday show of the new year.
I know it wasn't the one, doesn't it?
We'll sort that out.
But don't worry, nearly Christmas present. It'll be Birdie next Monday, so silver linings and all that. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, guys. Thank you as always for joining. Do share this across your social media. And if you're watching on YouTube, dead important that you hit that thumbs up button. And remember to get your NordVPN plan at a discounted offer as well. We'll see you guys very soon.